Hello, it's October. It's the spooky month, and people are really scaring me with their bad takes. My last video was about the US elections, my predictions for it, and we had some great discussion happening. We changed some minds about electoralism, but there still are some people on the internet, believe it or not, who are not convinced, and they're very vocal about it. Recently, Contrapoints made a great video talking about many concerns and questions people have regarding voting for Joe Biden. But Twitter does as Twitter is. And she got a lot of hate for it. Now, I've had my problems with Joe Biden. In fact, you can watch my video talking about one of the biggest problems I've had down in the description. But I firmly believe that voting against Trump's continued presidency is critical for democratic survival. The biggest people in this camp against voting for Joe Biden are Virgil, Texas, and Briahna Joy Gray, who recently had a debate with Professor Noam Chomsky on their podcast Bad Faith. So, what we'll do in this episode is take a look at the arguments from Contrapoints, from the Bad Faith debate, from the comments section of my previous video, and I'll tell you a story about a country where these anti-electoral measures really failed. So yeah, Contrapoints and Chomsky are right. Vote for Joe Biden. And here's why. Part 1. Contrapoints is good actually. Now you should definitely watch the Contrapoints video if you haven't already, but let's start by taking a look at the arguments that come out of the Socratic dialogue between her and this personification of this very weird tendency on the left. So let's go. Here are the reasons why you should vote for Joe Biden, argued by Contrapoints, analyzed by me. A vote for Joe Biden is a vote against Trump. It's not an endorsement of Joe Biden as a person or his policies. Voting is not supporting. Voting is not even liking. Voting is just hitting it less than the other person. It is a utilitarian act. It is not a reflection of your virtue. It is preventing Trump from getting a second term. That's it. Keep this in mind as we move forward. Now the question becomes, why do we want Trump from getting a second term? And the answer really is orange man bad. I don't know what to tell you. While they may both be beholden to capital, that's true. There are a number of differences between Trump and Biden, and electing Biden will materially make the lives of people in the United States and the world better as compared to Trump. The first reason is the Supreme Court. Many Americans fail to understand the importance of the Supreme Court in their lives. As I argued in my last video, which you can find down in the description by the way, with the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, a lot will change for the worse. The Affordable Care Act will finally be struck down. Religious conservatives will be allowed to discriminate against LGBTQ people, even in government contracts. Federal law officers could gain immunity from violations of the Constitution. There will be limits on the Congress to investigate the president, and abortion. Roe v. Wade will be struck down. Now I should just end the video right now. The court has judicial review, and with the control of the courts you can pretty much do anything. The only way to stop this now is to abolish the filibuster and pack the courts. Joe Biden hasn't confirmed either, but he'll have to do this. The Democrats are socially liberal, and with the amount of support these positions have, they'll have to do this. They cannot let abortion be banned. Contrapoints, of course, makes many more arguments, all of which are right and correct and good. There's everything from withdrawing from the Paris Agreement to appointing a climate change denier as the head of the EPA, to badly managing the fucking pandemic which killed 200,000 people in the United States, to encouraging fascism in the country. There's a lot here that a Democrat wouldn't have done. Feel free to pause and read this. Furthermore, the plan isn't to just vote. You do everything you normally want to do as the left. Activism, protest, strike, unionizing, all good stuff. Great stuff even. But you need someone who can be affected this way. Democrats, by the virtue of having to pretend to care about all of these issues, will be much more amicable than Trump. Remember, it's always comparative, and you have to keep the distinction in mind at all times. As for the lack of democracy in the country, she says not voting is just not effective. I'd go even further. Not voting actually harms the democratic process because you're just not represented. The electoral system is broken, yes. But either you can make the best of the situation, or you can refuse to participate, thereby limiting your own power, which is counter to what you claim you want. Then there's engagement with a lot of points from the anti-electoral left who want to destroy capitalism right now and think elections are a waste of time and such, which you can watch in the video, but I think all of the arguments can be countered by just saying that those issues do not arise on voting day. None of the questions she argues are on the ballots on the election day. You either vote for Joe Biden or for Donald Trump because these are the only two possible outcomes to the election. No write-ins, no third-party votes can change the outcome. You can feel good in your heart, but your actions will be to the detriment of others. Then there's analysis of what motivates people to adopt such obviously wrong positions. And I agree with those because I once was that person, trying to be above it all, caring about being right more than how I'm interacting with people and actually changing minds. I'm sorry to break it to you, but it's just not effective. Further, Twitter as a platform shows you a very warped version of reality where you think the opinions you see everywhere are commonplace. But in reality, the left is not as powerful as we think it is. Not yet. Bernie Sanders lost. It doesn't matter what the structural problems are, he lost in conditions known to all. The left needs to be much, much stronger if it wants structural change. And that's just the truth. So, what do the detractors say? Let's go to the marketplace of ideas and see what's being said on Twitter. At AnarchoPack, whose insights I've liked before, says Tabby's arguments were naive, and so the video was frustrating. Well, I'm sorry to break it to you, but that's like a very vocal section of the left. The revolution is here, fuck electoralism crowd is very, very real. And yeah, they're naive. The fact is that there are no nuanced, non-voting, revolutionary arguments. At Comrade Xu says Contrapoints is too lazy to organize apparently, with 1,000 likes. Damn, people really need media comprehension skills. The argument was that you can't pin your hopes for change to a distant possibility of a revolution. You need to vote and continue working as an activist. Okay, last one. At the Olive Fairy says that none of the arguments would work with an actual Marxist, and when prodded further, she gives a link to an article for her argument, and this apparently is the relevant take. Biden will not change his position in response to protest. That's it. Well, if you think that, you have a very low view of your own activism, don't you? You don't really believe you can change things? Also, are you going to tell me that Trump is more likely to listen to you? Remember, one person will become president at the end of this thing. So, better try and get a person who is at least more likely to listen to you, who at least has some chance. Bernie Sanders will probably be in the cabinet. He has a plan to move Biden left. You can either do the same and actually make progress or always stay on the defense, fighting against an ever-increasing reduction of rights. You really want liberal Democrats as your opposition rather than fascists. Believe me. Part 2. Well, they call bad faith. They were really smart in calling their podcast bad faith because I can't talk about it without it seeming like a terrible joke. Nevertheless, I'll say that I quite like both of the hosts. Virgil, if you don't know, is one of the hosts of Chapo Trap House, and Briahna was the National Press Secretary for Bernie Sanders. They had Professor Noam Chomsky on, who is a linguist, philosopher, activist, and one of the most respected voices on the left. They debated him on his belief that voting against Trump is important. So let's take a look at his argument.
What are the long-term consequences of everybody on the broad left, Democrats, liberals, everyone, saying that under any circumstances, we will vote for a Democratic candidate as long as they are incrementally better than the Republican candidate? Does that way of thinking contribute to the rightward shift of the Democratic Party over years? And what mechanism will ever stop that shift if we're not willing to ever, under any circumstances, leverage our votes?
What you're saying, if you think it through, is we should help Trump win because maybe in the long run, that'll affect the Democratic Party. That's a terrible choice. Helping Trump win, as you're proposing, would mean 4 more years of destruction of the environment, getting possibly to tipping points, which would be irreversible, certainly making any effort to deal with it very difficult. It would mean stacking the judiciary with young, ultra-right lawyers top to bottom, so that nothing would be possibly done for a generation, and I can go on and on. I don't think that's a wise choice, just on the hope that maybe sometime in the long term, the Democratic Party will pay attention to the fact that you're part of the 50% of non-voters.
Chomsky is based, guys. Can we get some based Chomskys in the chat? So, what's their argument here? In the full interview, they argue that they want to not vote for Biden unless he concedes on certain policy positions. But why would Biden ever concede on these positions? He won the primary in a landslide. The candidate who held the positions we're advocating for sadly lost. Why would Biden change his positions to become similar to a less popular candidate? Even with you threatening to not vote, either you do this and become irrelevant if he wins anyways, or he loses and blames you, and the party uses that as an excuse to move right. It's a lose-lose for you. Now, what do they say in response to this? They'll show you statistics on how many people support Medicare for all, for instance, or the Green New Deal, both of which are excellent policy proposals. But there are a lot of different numbers on this depending on how the question is asked to people. Second, people just didn't come out to vote for Bernie Sanders. Even if they agreed with him privately, they didn't show that by coming out to vote in the Democratic primaries. So Biden really has no incentive to change his position. He was selected by Democrats who already support his agenda. So he has no reason to move right now before the elections.
I take the multi-generational threat very seriously. As a Black American whose family members have been living as a third tier in American society. My mother was born into an America that didn't recognize her basic human rights. In 1960, she's a relatively young woman. And so what concerns me is the way in which the vote blue no matter who mindset basically privileges more recent concerns that are equally grave as more long-standing concerns that are built in the status quo, and says we have to vote for X candidate to prevent X ill from happening. At the same time, those who have suffered under the status quo never seem to get an opportunity to have their issues heard.
What Chomsky is arguing for is elementary. There are only two possible candidates who can win the election. This is the only question that's arising on election day. There are many valid concerns and questions, but none of them will arise on election day. If you don't vote for Joe Biden, you make it more likely that Trump will win. They'll agree with this. They've said repeatedly in the episode that they do want Trump to win in case Biden doesn't concede and adopt Bernie Sanders' policies, which again, Bernie Sanders lost. What are they trying to achieve with this? They're trying to get the Democratic Party to move left. How, you might ask? There is no plan. And that's exactly the problem. They're just hoping that this will happen. Why do you think the Democratic Party will move left after you cost them an election? The progressive movement is certainly getting bigger, but it is in the majority. If the Democrats lose the election because of this certain group not voting, the entire progressive movement will be isolated and ostracized. It would be in their best interest to do that. They would in fact move right and try to get more moderate vote because they cannot rely upon the progressives to win them elections anymore. Do you want an example? Look at 2016. The party didn't move left. All changes came because of the work done by Bernie Sanders and his movement and the progressives elected by the organizations like the Democratic Socialists of America. So, how do you solve the problem of Biden being too conservative for our taste? You don't move him. You fucking push him after he's elected. Your activism, strikes, unionizing, all of that will push Biden. Bernie Sanders said recently in an interview that he has his own progressive plan for the first 100 days to push Biden. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was on TV talking about the need to push Biden left and the need to get progressives on the cabinet. They're all ready to do the work. It's the only way to win. They have a plan. Briahna and Virgil do not. Why are they making this argument? I don't know, but it seems to me that it's personal. Bernie's loss really warped their idea of what the function of a primary is. And really what the size of the progressive movement even is in the United States. I also want to stress Chomsky's point about climate change, and I'm really glad that he centered that throughout the debate. Biden is infinitely better on climate change than Trump, because Trump is really taking the world in a backward direction. Biden has already conceded in many ways. One of them is his climate plan, which was made by the Sunrise Movement. And it's a great plan. It's not the Green New Deal, but we really need it. The world cannot afford 4 more years of climate destruction because it would really mean the end. Part 3. People have tried this before. You're wrong. Many people have struggled with the idea of whether Trump is uniquely bad, if he's really a fascist. People are even in my mentions on Twitter, at leftclicktv by the way, you should follow me there. They're saying that Biden is a fascist.
Come on, man. What are we talking about?
Biden is not a fascist. He's a conservative Democrat, but he's not a fascist. Let me tell you a story about a country called India. India had a center-right government. People didn't like them. The left hated them, the right hated them, so they got voted out. Left didn't have any electoral chance, so the right won. The far right, they came to power and slowly undermined the democratic institutions. They relied on xenophobia to fuel their voter base, and they got powerful and popular. In their second term, they're doubling down, changing stuff for the worse all around. Now people wonder if they'll ever leave. Sound familiar? This is what happens when such actions are approved. Trump will double down on the destructions of institutions. People say, if the Democrats win, maybe someone worse will come. But if Trump wins, he can ensure that someone worse will come. That's the difference between Biden and Trump, and why Biden is not a fascist. It's the part where Trump is undermining democratic institutions and supporting white supremacy while Biden isn't. I know for some of you, voting is an emotional choice. There's no shame in saying that. But you really need to think about the consequences of voting on other people or voting for someone other than Biden, which is a non-vote. Voting for Joe Biden is a vote against Trump. Again, there's no path to victory if Trump wins. There's no moving the Democratic Party left. It will only end in disaster. It requires courage and compassion to vote. You have to stop caring for looking right. You have to stop being edgy. You have to participate in the system. But it's worth it. Not just that, it's necessary. I hope you make the right choice. Part 4. Responding to comments. In my last video, I made the case for how Trump will try to replicate the Bush v. Gore crisis to steal the election. Video linked in the description again. And I argued for why that's the biggest reason to vote for Joe Biden. Most people agreed, some did not. But now that you know all the arguments around this issue, here's my rapid fire response to some of the arguments. I'll go fast, so pause to read the comment. Let's go. They're afraid that people will stop working towards a better future if Biden is elected. 2 responses. First, if Trump wins, there's no possibility of a better world. You literally can't move him. Second, you want disillusionment with neoliberalism to push progressive policies. If people are fighting fascism, they'll always choose the safer liberal option. Next, Democrats are the only viable alternative in a first past the post system, and only they can change the electoral method. Republicans will never have a national policy for ranked choice or representative voting. You want the US to lose hegemony, but at what cost? I care about our friends in the US, especially the most marginalized. And the rise of fascism in the heart of the empire is not good for anyone. Third, mass movements can only push Democrats. Trump is not decreasing the military budget. See the third answer. Let's go. Their concern is free and fair elections. I talked about the major problem that can occur in the video they're commenting on, so I don't know what they're asking. The military certainly isn't helping Trump if he loses the election. I've already explained the Bush v. Gore crisis in that video, so you can prevent it if you vote for Biden overwhelmingly, and he has a definitive win. Next, the problem is with the idea of vote shaming, which I find very funny because all attempts to convince people to vote for Biden are being called vote shaming online. See, there are 2 kinds of people. There are those who are the most marginalized and out of politics. They are disillusioned, not paying attention. Then there are those who are very much tuned into politics and are purposefully not voting. All attempts are being made to convince the second group. That's what Contrapoints is doing. That's what Chomsky is doing even. Briahna and Virgil are conflating these two. And Chomsky rightly calls them out on this. It's literally the job of activists like them to convince these voters. Also, it's so funny that some portions of the left are so averse to vote shaming when all we've done is to bully and shame supporters of Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren on their very correctly pointed out bad choices in the primaries. It's really funny. Okay, last one for the night. Oh, for fuck's sake, for the 10,000th time, liberals on the left, and Biden is also a fascist. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed this or found it helpful, please like it. And if you want to convince someone else you see online, share this video with them. This is probably the last US election video I'll make. Hopefully everything goes well and I don't need to make another update video. We'll soon talk about some really fun stuff, so stay tuned for that. If you're new here, please subscribe and hit the notification bell because we need all the support we can get. And I'm really excited to have you here and be part of a little community. Alright, that's it. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.